They always say winter doesn't care who you are. On that night, it proved them right. The thermometer nailed outside the kitchen window read minus 35 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that turns breath into needles and makes the dark feel heavier than usual. 16-year-old Caleb Turner stood in the narrow hallway, his heart pounding, his ears ringing from words that had already been said and could never be taken back. The argument hadn't started loud. It never did. It began with clipped sentences, tired accusations, and that familiar tone adults use when they've already decided the ending. Caleb tried to explain, tried to slow things down, but his voice cracked, thin and powerless. Then came the sentence that froze him more than the air outside. "Get out." At first he thought he'd misheard, but the front door opened, letting a blade of Arctic wind slice through the house. The warm smell of dinner vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp bite of snow and metal-cold air. Caleb didn't pack a bag. There was no dramatic pause. He grabbed the thin jacket hanging by the door, the one meant for quick trips, not survival, and stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind him with a final, hollow thud. That sound followed him for years. The cold hit immediately, brutal and unforgiving. His eyelashes began to stiffen before he reached the end of the driveway. Every breath burned his lungs, shallow and frantic. The snow beneath his boots squeaked loudly, the sound unnervingly crisp, like the ground itself was breaking. Caleb stood there for a moment, staring at the house. The windows glowed warm and yellow. Inside, life continued without him. Outside, the world felt vast, hostile, and completely indifferent. He started walking. The road was empty, swallowed by drifting snowbanks and darkness. Streetlights flickered weakly, doing little more than cast long, lonely shadows. With each step, Caleb felt smaller, an undersized figure moving through an oversized storm. His fingers went numb fast, then painful, then strangely distant, as if they no longer belonged to him. Fear crept in quietly. Not panic yet. Panic wastes energy. This was deeper, a heavy, sinking realization that no one was coming to bring him back inside. That tonight, survival wasn't a concept. It was a countdown. He ducked behind an old storage shed near the edge of town, its warped wooden walls barely blocking the wind. The structure smelled like rot and rust, but it was something. Caleb pressed his back against the boards, pulling his jacket tight, trying to trap whatever heat he had left. That's when another truth settled in, clear and terrifying. The cold wasn't the real enemy. Moisture was. Snow melted against his clothes, then refroze. Damp fabric pulled heat from his body like a thief. If he stayed still too long, he'd slow down. If he slowed down, he'd freeze. He'd heard stories like this on the news. People found in the morning, peaceful looking, never having felt the end. Caleb clenched his jaw. He wasn't ready to disappear into a headline. As the wind howled louder, rattling the shed and shaking the night apart, something shifted inside him. The fear didn't vanish, but it sharpened. Focus replaced shock. Instinct pushed aside disbelief. If this night was going to kill him, it wouldn't be because he gave up. Not yet. Caleb didn't know how long he stayed pressed against that shed. Time lost its shape in the cold. Minutes stretched. Seconds felt loud. The wind kept coming in angry bursts, slamming into the boards like it was trying to tear the place apart. He couldn't stay there. Standing still was a mistake. He knew that now. His legs had started to shake, not from fear, but from the cold creeping deeper, past skin and muscle, into something slower and dangerous. He forced himself to move, each step stiff and awkward, like his body belonged to someone older. A few hundred yards downhill, half hidden by drifting snow and tangled brush, Caleb spotted it, an abandoned hunting cabin, barely more than a shack. The roof sagged under years of neglect, and one shutter hung loose, banging softly in the wind. It looked forgotten, unwanted. Right now, that made it perfect. He shoved the door open with his shoulder. It groaned in protest, releasing a cloud of stale air that smelled like damp wood and rusted iron. Inside, the cabin was dark, empty, and bitterly cold, but the wind dropped instantly. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred. Caleb closed the door behind him and leaned against it, chest heaving. His breath echoed too loudly in the small space. For the first time since being kicked out, he wasn't fighting the storm head-on. But the danger wasn't gone. The cold inside the cabin was quieter, more patient. It waited. Caleb scanned the room with frantic, searching eyes. A broken table, an old wood stove, cracked but intact. No firewood, no insulation. Gaps in the walls where daylight leaked through like thin knives. This wasn't safety. It was a delay. He peeled off his gloves. His fingers were red, swollen, trembling. Snow clung to his sleeves and melted fast, soaking the fabric. That's when it hit him again. The realization that had settled under the shed. Wet meant dead. He stripped off his jacket despite the cold, shaking it hard until clumps of snow flew free. He wrung out his sleeves, teeth clenched, ignoring the pain. Every drop of water on his clothes felt like a countdown ticking faster. Caleb began pacing the cabin in slow, deliberate loops. Walking kept the blood moving. Stopping meant freezing. He counted his steps, giving his mind something steady to hold on to. 1, 2, 3. The walls creaked as the wind howled outside. Somewhere in the distance, something cracked. A tree splitting under the weight of ice. The sound sent a jolt of fear through him. This storm wasn't easing up. It was settling in. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion clawed at him. His eyelids felt heavy. His thoughts blurred at the edges. He caught himself swaying, almost drifting. That scared him more than the cold. Caleb slapped his cheeks hard, forcing himself awake. He thought about the house he'd left behind. The warmth, the light, the normal life that had shut him out. Anger flared briefly, sharp and bitter, but it burned energy he couldn't afford, so he let it go. Instead, he watched the wind through the cracked shutter. He studied how the snow moved, how it didn't fall straight, but swirled, crept, found every opening. He noticed how the floor near the door stayed drier than the corners where the air stalled. A thought began to form. Unclear, fragile, but real. Maybe surviving this winter wasn't about being stronger than the cold. Maybe it was about learning how the cold worked and moving around it. As dawn crept in, pale and unforgiving, Caleb was still on his feet. Alive, alert, changed. The night hadn't beaten him, but it had taught him something, and that lesson was only beginning. By the third day, the storm had stopped screaming, but the cold stayed. Caleb woke to a silence that felt heavier than the wind. The cabin creaked softly as the temperature sank even lower, dipping past minus 38 degrees Celsius overnight. His breath rose in thick clouds, slow and steady now. Not panicked, not frantic. He had learned better. The first nights had taught him a brutal truth. The cold didn't rush you, it waited, and it punished mistakes quietly. He stepped outside at first light, boots crunching over snow hardened like stone. The air bit into his lungs, sharp and unforgiving. He moved fast, not running, but purposeful, because wasted motion meant wasted heat. Behind the cabin sat a collapsed woodshed, half buried and forgotten. Inside were warped boards, scraps of plastic tarp, an old canvas drop cloth, stiff with age, and a handful of bent nails. To anyone else, it was junk. To Caleb, it looked like possibility. He remembered how the snow crept through every crack, how damp air turned clothing into a liability. He remembered the way the wind swirled, never straight, always searching for openings. And suddenly the pieces clicked together. What if he didn't fight the cold directly? What if he built something that guided it instead? Caleb spent the morning dragging scraps through the snow, his muscles burning, fingers aching despite double layers of gloves. He leaned old boards into a curved frame between the cabin door and the woodshed, forming a low passage barely tall enough to crawl through. Over it, he stretched the canvas and tarp, securing them tight but not sealed, just enough to block wind while letting trapped air breathe. By afternoon, the structure took shape. A narrow, uneven tunnel, ugly, awkward, ridiculous looking. Exactly the kind of thing people laughed at. A pair of men from a nearby property rode past on snowmobiles, slowing when they saw him. One of them shook his head, grinning. "Kid's building a coffin for himself," the man called out. "Cold'll get him by morning." Caleb didn't answer. He kept working, tying knots with stiff fingers, adjusting the curves so snow slid off instead of piling up. He packed snow along the sides for weight, shaping it like insulation. His movements were slow but deliberate, fueled by a quiet, stubborn determination that surprised even him. This wasn't hope. This was calculation. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Caleb crawled through the tunnel for the first time. Inside, the air felt different. Still cold, but calmer. No biting gusts, No swirling snow, just dim, muted light filtering through canvas. He reached the woodshed without fighting the wind. That alone felt like a victory. He carried a small armful of wood back through the tunnel and into the cabin. When he lit the stove, the flame caught faster than before. The heat stayed. The air dried out slowly, steadily. That night, as the temperature dropped again toward minus 40 degrees Celsius, Caleb lay near the stove, listening to the distant howl of the wind sliding over the curved roof of his strange creation. The canvas rattled. The structure shook, but it held. For the first time since being thrown out into the cold, Caleb slept more than an hour at a time. Outside, the world still wanted him gone. Inside that narrow, foolish-looking tunnel, a 16-year-old boy had quietly taken control of his fate, while everyone else was too busy laughing to notice. The temperature dropped again the next night, hard and fast. By sundown, the radio chatter Caleb sometimes picked up on his battered handheld went quiet. No weather updates, no warnings, just static. Outside, the wind returned with a vengeance, slamming into the trees and tearing loose snow from the branches like shrapnel. By midnight, it was officially minus 40 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that doesn't just hurt, it disables. This wasn't winter anymore. This was survival territory. Caleb felt it the moment he cracked the cabin door. The air punched him in the chest, stealing his breath before he could react. He shut the door immediately, heart racing, and stood still until the dizziness passed. One mistake out there, one exposed minute too long, and the cold would take something permanent. Fingers, toes, maybe worse. He crawled into the tunnel instead. Inside, the canvas trembled violently, the sound loud and relentless, like a freight train passing inches from his head. Snow slid down the curved sides, unable to cling. The air was frigid but stable. No sudden gusts, no swirling powder forcing its way inside. Caleb moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his gloves dry, his breath controlled. He reached the woodshed, grabbed only what he needed, and turned back. That discipline saved him. Elsewhere, it wasn't going as well. Down the slope, the people who had laughed days earlier were in trouble. Snowdrifts buried doors overnight. Wood piles stacked against cabin walls had turned into frozen bricks, soaked by melt during the day, and locked solid by the night's brutal drop. Fires struggled. Smoke filled rooms instead of heat. Men went outside with axes, hacking at their own fuel in blinding wind, burning calories faster than they could replace them. Inside one cabin, a child cried as blankets were piled higher. Inside another, furniture started disappearing into the stove. Caleb didn't see any of that, but he felt the storm's power pressing in, testing every decision he'd made. Around 3 a.m., the wind shifted. The tunnel shuddered hard, stakes groaning. Caleb woke instantly, heart hammering. He grabbed his flashlight and crawled through, checking each tie, each anchor point, reinforcing where the canvas strained. His fingers burned, then numbed, but he didn't rush. Panic breaks things. Patience keeps them standing. Back inside, the stove burned clean. Dry wood cracked softly, throwing off deep, steady heat. The air stayed clear. The walls warmed slowly, holding what little comfort they could. Caleb sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled in close. He wasn't comfortable, but he was alive. As the storm peaked, the howling outside became constant, a furious roar that swallowed all other sound. Yet inside that narrow tunnel and fragile cabin, there was a strange calm. Not safety, but control. Caleb realized something then, as exhaustion tugged at him again. He wasn't surviving because he was tougher than the cold. He was surviving because he had stopped fighting it. While others battled the storm head-on, burning through strength and resources, Caleb let the cold pass over him, around him. He conserved, he adapted, he waited. By morning, when the wind finally began to ease, the valley would look different. And so would the balance between who was prepared and who wasn't. The storm didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like a predator finally bored with the fight. The wind softened first, then the sky lightened from steel gray to a dull, exhausted blue. Days later, the sun returned. Not warm, not kind, but present. Enough to start the thaw. When spring finally pushed its way into the valley, it revealed what winter had taken. Cabins that once looked sturdy now sagged under damage no one had noticed while fighting to stay alive. Woodpiles were half gone or ruined. Logs split, soaked, warped from weeks of freezing and thawing. The smell of damp smoke hung in the air, clinging to clothes, walls, and tired faces. People emerged slowly, thinner than before, quieter. Some had burned furniture. Others had torn up floorboards just to keep a flame alive through the last brutal weeks. Survival had come at a cost, and it showed in their eyes, worn, hollow, humbled. Up on the ridge, Caleb Turner stepped out of his cabin as the snow receded. He looked different too. Leaner, yes, but steady, clear-eyed, strong in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. The tunnel was gone now, the canvas folded neatly and stored away, its job finished. The ground beneath it was dry and firm, untouched by the mud and rot surrounding everything else. His remaining firewood sat stacked and clean, curing in the spring air. One afternoon, a man from down the slope made the long walk up to Caleb's place. He hesitated at the edge of the yard, scanning the cabin, the woodshed, the calm order of it all. "You make it through all right?" the man finally asked. Caleb nodded. "Yeah." The man swallowed. "How?" Caleb didn't lecture. He didn't brag. He simply pointed to the folded canvas leaning against the shed. "I stopped trying to beat the cold," he said. "I just stopped giving it ways to hurt me." Word spread quietly after that. No headlines, no praise, just questions. Measurements taken, distances paced out between doors and sheds. The same people who once laughed now listened carefully, their pride softened by experience. Caleb never asked for apologies. He didn't need them. That winter had already given him something more valuable than validation. It had given him confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you can adapt when the world turns against you. The kind built not on anger, but on awareness, on patience, on the courage to look foolish while doing the thing that keeps you alive. He was still young, still figuring things out. But one truth stayed with him long after the snow was gone. Survival isn't about having more, it's about understanding better. So here's the question for you. If you were 16, alone, pushed out into minus 40 degrees Celsius with nothing but scraps and instinct, would you panic and fight the cold head on? Or would you stop, observe, and build something others might laugh at, but that could save your life? Let me know your answer in the comments below. I read everyone. And if stories like this, stories about quiet resilience, smart survival, and lessons we've forgotten, mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are more stories waiting, each one reminding us that sometimes the smartest move is the one no one else understands, until it's too late.